Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm here with Doris Quintanilla. Doris is on a mission to educate, empower, mentor, and affect change in the lives of women of color as the co-founder and executive director of the Melanin Collective. Doris has led community health education and youth education and leadership development programs in the United States and the Dominican Republic, focusing on building partnerships and recruiting student leaders. She's also managed continuing education programs for reproductive health care professionals and conducted healthcare-related surveys and qualitative research. So thank you so much, Doris, for making some time to talk to me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your story and what led you to help start the Melanin Collective.
Yeah, I've worked in nonprofits my entire life. I grew up in nonprofits. My dad owned a nonprofit, and I graduated after college, and that's what I wanted to do. I was in my third nonprofit space, and I was leading a recruitment training in Mexico, and suffered a brain injury, so a traumatic brain injury, and I wasn't taken care of. No one did anything right. I was one of the people in charge, and so that really puts it on you. And a brain injury means that you don't have the capacity to advocate for yourself. So I flew home. I went through a 2-year journey of healing and getting better, and back to, I'm a UCLA grad, but at the time of impact, and even a few months after, I was reading at a 5th grade level, comprehension was at a 3rd grade level. And so it's been a very big journey of getting my wits back. And at the end of the journey, I was, given this diagnosis of having disabilities now. So I have cognitive disabilities. And I was working back in sexual reproductive health to kind of have more stability. Traveling and working abroad takes a lot of time. And so you don't have time for all these appointments that you have to take, all the therapy. And so I was working in the space. It was a different space, but also very toxic. And I realized within this journey of being injured, being in these organizations, there's a lot of mission-driven organizations in the nonprofit sector that don't live by their values. They're hypocritical institutions, right? And they don't do the work inward. They just expect to do it in the community, and they forget about their employees and staff. And women of color, there's no data on this, but women of color are drawn to these organizations, the nonprofit sector, because we want to give back. We struggled so hard to be here, so we want to come back and improve our communities of color everywhere. And so we end up in these spaces that are just toxic, exploitative, and abusive. And that's what I was experiencing in this sexual reproductive health organization. My co-founder and I worked together. She did communications, I ran programming. And we just kind of started talking over brunch and happy hours about how this is not okay. And we did something about it within the organization. And it created a change. The head was removed. So the CEO was removed after 22 years of serving in that organization. And of course, they didn't give us it was because of your work. It was because of what you said and speaking out and sorry you were so miserable and all that. But it really taught us that change can happen and that it's not okay, that we need to have these conversations. And what we're doing is we're all in silos, we're all miserable. The moment we share our story, everybody else wants to share their story too. So, after that was a success for us, even though we left the space of we want to do this for every toxic organization out there that's exploiting women of color. So we came together and we created the Melanin Collective. My co-founder and I run workshops, run trainings, facilitation of this professional development for women of color specifically, but also we consult with organizations so that they're able to retain, recruit, and promote women of color at all levels of the organization. Because the problem has to be addressed on both ends, right? So that's kind of how we got here. And so I didn't start the MC to talk about my disability, but in working with people, I realized there's so much ableism in the world. And, I had to come out with my story and be like, oh, by the way, I need these accommodations. And it turned into a whole thing. So now it is a part of the MC, talk about it, unashamed, unapologetic about it all the time. And that's just kind of the values that we hold.
So when you were going through this experience at the organization, and when you and your co-founder were kind of thinking of ways that you could, make an impact, make a difference, share the learning that you were going through about these kind of toxic work environments, what led you to think, actually we should go off on our own and build a business around this rather than, I don't know, what other things were you kind of considering in terms of ways of making an impact, and what led you down that choice?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the idea before. I was like, I should run something. I've done youth work, so I want to do like youth empowering youth kind of organization. But then I was like 20 something, and I was like, I'm not ready. What am I doing right now? So I think with the conversations that we were having with my co-founder, was like, someone needs to do something about it. And I've been doing nonprofits for like working in nonprofits for over 10 years, and I was kind of like, I'm gonna do it. If someone were supposed to do this, they would have done it by now. So we should just take over and just do it ourselves. We did it for this organization. We were able to create change. And so we should be doing this everywhere else and empowering other women to do this at their organizations as well. We don't have to come and do it ourselves. You can be empowered to do it as well. Speak up and talk about your experiences. So we decided to not be a nonprofit, one, because of hypocrisy. Also, Latinas make the least amount of money out of anyone else. So if I'm going to get paid, I have to pay myself. So we're a social enterprise. We're mission driven. We have a focus, but we're also here to get paid for our work, because if I can make up for the 10 years that I haven't gotten paid for my work, it's going to take some time. So yeah, we are definitely for-profit social enterprise.
Cool. And so in terms of interacting with these organizations, I imagine that especially the nonprofits and the so-called like mission-driven nonprofits that aren't really driven to support their staff, I imagine that there's a lot of like psychological trauma that people have to go through, just because if you're fighting against the organization, that means you're also fighting against the mission, and you're wasting our resources when it could be going to help X, Y, and Z. How do you break through with people who run organizations like that? Because I've met them, and I've worked with people like that, and there is this kind of intense, driven mentality, and it's tough to break through that. So like, how do you actually go about working with an organization?
So we address the power dynamics. We address implicit bias, unconscious bias. It really has to be an internal look into the culture of the organization. So we love anonymous surveys. We love focus groups. Having conversations with people without the fear of retaliation is really important, because people are more honest. We have a sign at our workshops like, please leave your code switching at the door. We only want to talk to your authentic self. And so I feel like we create a space for people to open up. And then also, we hold people accountable. We're not going to work with an organization who just wants to say, we're doing this diversity work, checkbox, right? We hired a Latina, see, look, here's the brown faces in the room, which happens, right? We're not here for that. We're here to actually do the work. So it takes the leadership to do a lot of internal work on their own, recommendations for what you can do as an individual, because that is a lot of emotional labor that they put on to their, people of color in the organization, to even consult and stuff like that. But no one's going to be able to do the work for you. You have to do it for yourself. So just providing resources for them. And also, everyone has a boss. People think executive directors are just the top, but everyone has a boss. So you can always go to their boss and be like, this is what needs to be done. And I'm not sure how you want to handle it, but here you go. And then it's up to them to create that change.
Sure. I imagine also there is a lot of that. I don't know, and I'm just probably overgeneralizing, but like there's oftentimes a lot of privilege at the top of an organization like that isn't very self-aware. I mean, privilege in and of itself is inherently usually not very self-aware, but like it's interesting that you say they have to kind of come part way first. But what do you do about organizations that don't even have that kind of self-awareness that there is a problem? Is there usually like a route in that you work with some of these staff members that are feeling this, in order to try and just push them in a direction to start that conversation? Or are there other tactics that you use?
Yeah, so right now because we work with women of color specifically, we teach them how to go into your workplace and you need to file complaints with HR. The only thing, honestly, the bottom line is, if they're going to lose money, they will do something about it. If you're filing a complaint with HR, which a lot of nonprofits, surprise, surprise, don't have HR, it's very convenient. But escalating the issue and not letting the issue die, I think is something that really pushes people to like, fine, we'll deal with it, right? If it takes twisting of the arm or something bad is coming down the line, okay, we're going to do something. But it's actually a really good point of what we're working on right now. is a nonprofit salary. I'm sorry, my other job, a nonprofit survey of the experiences of women in the nonprofit sector.
Mhm.
And it's all grassroots. We're doing it ourselves because there is no data. One, we never ask women of color in anything. Even if you look at tech surveys, salary surveys, they never break it down to actual women of color, who's getting paid, right? And I have more questions, not just how are you treating and paying women of color, but does white presenting really affect your pay or black presenting? And it does. The answer is yes, right? But we, again, women of color, our voices are not valid. We need to bring data. So if I can say this all I want, they're like, yeah, whatever. You've had bad experiences, you don't know anything. Or I can bring all this data, and that's what we're doing. We're creating this. The survey will launch in the summer, and we're just going to get as many people as possible to take it within the US so that we can have this data to back it up. And from that, we want to develop a toolkit. So it's going to inform the work that we do, the workshops, the trainings, facilitations, but I also want it to be kind of, if you're an organization doing X, Y, Z, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe you should look internally of what's wrong with your organization and that you need help and that you need to address certain issues. But yeah, definitely people need more tools to have that epiphany. It's not going to come just because they read an article one day.
Yeah. Exactly. I just the kinds of challenges that you describe, especially the toxic work culture and environment. You know, there are some parallels with like these so-called unicorn seeking tech companies. The privilege actually often cases is usually the same. The hierarchy, the challenges, the lack of HR processes, the expectation that you are all here for the business. Yes, the salaries might be higher, but the actual culture and that toxic environment, is very similar. It kind of rings very true.
Yeah, and there's so much documentation on burnout in the tech culture for women of color specifically. Here in DC, we have Technically, we've worked with them and we get to see a lot of the articles, and that is one thing that we consistently see and that we call out as well as, it's a burnout culture in the tech community for everyone because you're like fast paced, you're trying to bring new products, so you're not going to sleep, you're going to work forever. But it's a different kind of exhaustion and burnout when you're also facing racism, macroaggressions, harassment, like all the things that can happen. It's like a layered on top of what you're already doing that your privilege doesn't allow you to see or to know what that really feels like or looks like.
Yeah. So when we hear a lot about kind of diversity in tech or diversity in nonprofits, diversity in X, Y, and Z, and I don't know. A lot of people take that to mean tokenism, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
but many of those that are kind of highlighted as successful still kind of look and sound a lot like I do, and yet you always see these programs that these companies are doing that sound in retrospect very tone deaf in terms of actually trying to move the needle. It sounds like probably because they never consulted anybody that they were kind of trying to target. But if, from your perspective, aside from the kind of work that you do, what does good look like when you see a program that is built, or maybe it's a business starting a new initiative that actually does work, and like what are the hallmarks of something that actually does try and move the needle successfully versus others that are much more kind of tone deaf, tokenism, and blinded by your privilege enough so that you don't even see what you're doing. That was a complicated question. Sorry.
I know. I was like, let me see. Well, I think it takes a lot. There's intentionality. I think it's knowing where you're recruiting new hires from, right? Because if you're going to your friends all the time, you're going to your same groups, you're not going to have diversity in that. So where are you recruiting from? What are your hiring practices? So are you posting salaries? Are you paying some people less than other people, right? People know these things, right? So I think the more transparent you can be, the better. The bigger the pool of recruitment, the more diversity that just will happen because that's your intention, right? So intentionality counts a lot, transparency. And then I think having an HR that is not the executive assistant to the CEO, that is not also your accountant, like an actual trained person that does HR and has like a handbook and protocols and procedures. So those things are meant to help the company, right? We're trying not to get sued, but also it makes employees feel safe and secure that they know where to go. So a lot of the time it's we don't know. Like there's a handbook, but they said they're updating it. It's 20 years old. I'm not sure. Or I tried going to this, or I tried contacting this other person, and there's nothing there. And so that lack of communication makes it feel worse than it really is. So having all, easily accessible accommodations, making things simple and easy to follow. I think, some places you talk about your disability and when the need for accommodations, and they're like, we're not even going to hire you. And that really deters, right? Your bias, we don't like your blind spot. You think that we're futuristic. We're thinking about, technology and what's coming down the line. And we can see this, different worlds. But at the same time, what does that world look like? And who is this world being built for? It should be for everyone. And disabled people are just this massive untapped resource. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. Doesn't mean they can't. They need a few accommodations. And actually, studies have shown that if you hire someone within the U.S. with disabilities, the most you'll spend is about $5,000 to set them up for the entirety of their time with you. So you'll have longevity, and you'll have people determined and willing to work with you because they've felt that investment, right? So professional development is really how do you keep people there, is by professionally developing them, making sure there's a leadership ladder, goals and things to aspire to, right? And you're all building community as well. And building community is not going to happy hour and hanging out with your boss. It's different. And there's building trust. There's this whole idea that we don't need to build trust because I'm paying you, but you do. Loyalty, trust, all those things are connected to the relationships that we're building. And so for you to build that, you need to have intentional people and management that actually knows how to manage. Train your managers. Don't just promote people because they've been there X amount of years or they're your sister's husband, right? You're promoting them because they know what they're doing. And if the rules are the same for everyone, it shouldn't be a problem, and diversity will happen. I think people will show up if you remove barriers to applications to, we are hiring disabled people because, disability looks so different for everyone, and it's just 1 in 5 Americans is considered disabled. So it's just removing all of the barriers, removing your biases and your blind spots to make sure that you're recruiting from everywhere and you're transparent with everything you're doing. I think is what sets up a good workplace and a good environment that people want to come and work with. And I found that organizations who are just trying to hide everything, even if they don't mean to, right? They're just it's so hard to find anything. Where's HR? I never see them. That just kind of gives you this culture idea. You think this place might be more horrible than it is, or you don't have the resources that you may have. So I think that was your question.
Absolutely. But it's interesting to hear you talk about such, I don't know, it's simple things. It's the basics that you expect that anybody would tell you. And I guess just looking at it, and again trying to take my own kind of biases in there. I see a lot of these programs that are set out, and they're about trying to increase representation or increase awareness or whatever it is. But at the heart of it, it's usually, I want to be known as being a pro-diversity person. Rah rah, look at how good I am. Look at how woke I am, or something like that. And then when you're called on that, and it's no, it's just a a humble brag exercise. You then start to see a really, I don't know, angry you're not grateful for this awareness, you see that a lot in tech, and I obviously being a white hetero loud American man, it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't affect me, but watching it, I don't know how to necessarily move the needle for those types of people, except for talking to them and saying, hey, what's the actual point of trying to find someone who just has a different skin color and say that they're your diversity pick. But are there certain types of programs out there that you've seen that actually, and aside from the basics that everyone should actually be paying attention to, are there certain ways of whether it's through kind of quotas or affirmative action type programs to kind of that has moved the needle in a positive direction rather than just an equalizing direction, and And yeah, and if you know any of them, like, what are some good examples of that? Sorry,
Yeah,
it's a bit of a rant.
no, totally. A good example is SRI. So I know you're going to ask me what that means, and I wrote a whole article on it for Technically, and I'm totally blanking.
That's okay.
Like sustainable, renewable investing or something. I'm going to butcher it. But it's a new way that they're trying to train investors in deciding who to invest in. And it's like a pie, right? And 1/3, and actually 2/3 has to do with diversity, what that looks like in numbers. So from, what does the board representation look like? Senior leadership, the C-suite, right? Management and worker bees, because you can say, look, we have 50%, POC, and they're all worker bees and they hold no power and they haven't been promoted in 10 years. Yeah. So this actually looks at, that's what I've seen that I'm really excited about. And I'm like, this is what we've been saying, but getting people to invest in companies who are following this model, and it's working. I know they reported a bunch of numbers on it last year of investors made decisions in investing based on these, this methodology, and from that resulted in better investments and higher returns, because we know diversity pushes innovation. You know this, but like doesn't translate to people for some reason. And so I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head, but they found that. And that, I think, is the model that I've been mostly excited about, that I've talked about, because it's a new thing, it's still picking up, but it's going. And I think it's really pushing, and it pushes for transparency as well. So in order for people to see all this, they have to go about it. But the other side is the chief diversity officer is like a new thing now. We're going to have an office for diversity. We're going to have chief diversity officers. Yeah. And they're going to have no power. They're going to have no staff, and they're going to be siloed in some office that we never see. Yeah. So what is the point? There was something, I think an article a few days ago someone sent me on this specific thing of like setting up to fail. And because this is such a new position, new people are coming into it and having all these expectations and demands of them, and then not being able to do anything because they're like, oh, I actually can't make decisions. I can't implement any of the recommendations. I just keep making recommendations, and people are like, great, read the memo, thank you. So I think it's really about checking models that are working, and that, I think, would be the one that I would say right now that I feel more like is all encompassing and checking on various things, which also is like greener stuff, right? Like, are you making less of an impact? What is your carbon footprint? All that kind of stuff. So I feel like it has a little bit of like building a better world, and using the working force in a better way, and then making money on top of it, like trying to show that you can still make money, and it's not that much of a lift to not be a crappy organization.
Like if we say everything's all right, it should be fine, right? We shouldn't have to do a lot of work for this. I would definitely hire more people of color, but I can't find any of them.
Oh my God, don't get me started on that. Yeah,
they don't exist. There's not enough of them.
There's no qualified people. I'm sitting there on the board like, yeah. Okay, great. So you're saying I'm not qualified to be here, or you're saying I can't? What do you need? Because I have 400 women that I can call right now to be on your be here, to be that. So I think what we're doing as a collective is just encouraging women to apply to all the positions, to bring your friends, the way that people who have social capital and financial capital do. We need to start doing that for ourselves. And so we get a lot of this infighting and colorism and bull crap. Like, we don't even talk, like, we do talk about that because it's important, and it triggers people just as much as talking about race. Colorism within our own melanin, that also triggers people, and it pushes boundaries. And talking about your privilege as a lighter skin Latina versus a darker skin Latina or Afro Latina, that kind of stuff, really, or more indigenous looking, like, it really does trigger people too. So we have work to do on our end as well. But part of that is, this is why we're a collective. We're going to learn from that. We're going to push through that, and we're going to support each other, because we all win if we like drag everyone with us, right? We can't be telling them you should do X, Y, Z, and then we're not living our values.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this. Incredibly interesting. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun, and congrats on the work you're doing, and I'm excited to see what comes out. Are you sleeping?
Not this week, but it's okay.
Oh, yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
All right, we'll rest up after.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you too.
Bye.